Hello and welcome to GIBS Business. The demographics of Africa's children are experiencing a shift on a scale perhaps unprecedented in human history. According to UNICEF's Generation 2030 Africa report, almost 2 billion babies will be born in Africa in the next 35 years. Over the same period, Africa's under-18 population will increase by 2/3, reaching almost a billion by mid-century. UNICEF's David Anthony explains.
The African population will double by 2050. That's like adding a China to Africa in 35 years. This is absolutely unprecedented in human history, that many people will join an existing population of about 1.1 billion in that space of time. Specifically going to the child population, we're going to have around about 650 million more children in the next 35 years, taking the number of under-18s in Africa to 1 billion. Again, a China of children in Africa. Africa has already the highest proportion of children as part of its total population. 40% of all Africans are under the age of 18 years old. If you take that to youth, it becomes way over 50%. So when you talk about Africa, you aren't necessarily talking about youth and children.
Right.
Yeah? The majority of Africans are young. 1 in every 3 children also is going to be African very soon by the mid-century. And by the end of the century, as we said, 41% of children will be there. Now, this is the median scenario. This is not the high fertility scenario. And even though fertility rates in Africa are coming down, there's still now on average, a woman in Africa of childbearing years has around about 4.5 children compared to the global average of around just over 2. The number of births, again, things that we have to think about, number of births in Africa in the next 15 years, not even till 2050. By 2030, 1.8 billion births will take place on this continent. That's a sobering thought. Do we have enough facilities? So with these statistics in mind, our issue was to look further. What are the forces driving the high fertility rates in Africa? And one of them very clearly is adolescent fertility. Much, much higher than the rate of the global rate of adolescent fertility in Africa. It's almost like 1 in every 10 adolescents is having a child. Or in female adolescents is having a child. And I think the other forces that we are seeing driving high fertility levels in Africa are things such as fragility and conflict. It's very clear that in fragile states in Africa, fertility rates are much higher than in non-fragile states.
We go from thinking about the ballooning population from being a liability to a real asset. And that ultimately for me comes from education, right? Unless we invest in all of these young people that are being produced, it's going to be a wasted generation. My mother, whenever she goes and travels to the States or whatever, she comes back and like, man, they must come and build those highways for us here. I said, no. Why don't we build it ourselves? And the only way we can do that is by, investing in our brain power. So I think that it's time for us to stop thinking about incremental changes. What we need is a complete step change where we need to think about radical solutions to the problem of education in Africa.
Yeah.
Such that we leapfrog the way we educate ourselves. And so that in a very quick generation, we're able to actually create people who are equipped to create their own jobs through entrepreneurship. And we're able to educate themselves and are actually able to utilize all these resources that you talk about to actually create wealth so that we can look after ourselves, pave our own roads, build our own houses, educate ourselves. Because unless we do that, we'll be begging the rest of the world for the rest of our lives.
According to UNICEF's Generation 2030 Africa report, by mid-century, the number of women of reproductive age in Africa will more than double, in contrast to Asia, where these numbers are shrinking. But does Africa have the leadership to protect its natural resources and take advantage of this demographic explosion?
Half the population of Africa is probably in the age, around the age of 19. Not too far from here, our leaders and heads of state, you know what the average age is there? Probably 70, some of them are even 90. Now, man, when I'm 90 years old, I just want to be playing with grandkids. You shouldn't be running a country. So this is the conundrum. This is the dichotomy we have. We produce another 1,000 reports of that, but we do not have the leadership that has the political will and the courage to implement what is right. So what are we doing in Africa? You know, all the statistics show it. We have a demographic dividend. We will have the youngest population of any continent. Now, that is an asset. That is our most important asset. Now, let's look at our other assets in Africa. We have probably a third of the mineral wealth that fuels the global economy. We have 60% of the remaining arable land. Yet we have a third of hunger and malnutrition in the world. We look at our forests, we're probably 15% of the world forests. Look at our oceans, look at the land surface we have. We have tremendous assets. But why are we poor? Why do we have to suffer the statistics that we keep writing reports about? It comes to the issue of governance and leadership. And I was young, living under apartheid, which has stolen our dignity. Our parents told us, don't get involved in politics because you'll get arrested, beaten up, killed, or tortured. We defied them. You know what my advice to you is? You know what the statistics are. You face it every day. You need to organize yourself and build the power that changes your reality. If we stood back and said we had nothing we could do in 1976, we would still be living under apartheid. So I'm not going to say, I have the solution, you have the solution, you know what to do, go out and do it.
In our lifetime, we will have doubled or more than doubled population across the continent. What would that do to our increasingly scarce water resources? Double trouble, quadruple trouble. So unless our politicians realize that, and that's where the challenge lies, like Jay was highlighting, we have a political elite that is neurotic in the pursuit of power. And they are neurotic in the pursuit of power in the sense that they're not thinking it's short-termism. My term is 4 years. I'll have to do what I have to do, get what I can get out of that, and then move on or stay with no additional benefit bringing on to the country. So we need to say, if the future is literally in the hands of the youth, you need to take that political power. I'm not saying violently, but you need to organize yourself. You need to mobilize yourself. I passionately believe that my father's generation has failed us when it comes to sustainability. My generation is failing us. And if you, the youth, fail us, then we can all forget about it. So get on to that, become political, don't leave it to the professional politicians. Last election, I was looking at it in Gauteng province, 53% of all votes cast were cast by young people. And what is the average age of the Gauteng legislature? Why do you hand over power that you have to older folks like me and others, and you come and complain that these guys don't understand the needs of the youth? Go out there and take power.
It's about leadership, but making the right decisions, not influenced by short-termism or influenced by vested interests. We ask our leaders today, do you have the commitment to the long-term future of our continent to make the right choices about the assets we have that places a path of hope and opportunity for the young people?
Almost half of Africa's countries are classified as low income and are home to around half of its total and youth population. It will be up to this youth to mobilize against current conditions and create a future they envision for themselves.
The nice thing about the situation that we have is that the population is so young that if youth mobilize and actually create a youth party, you can win an election. You can actually create, 60-70% of the population of the electorate is below the age of 30 in most countries. So at the end of the day, we as the youth should stop complaining and actually take action. Unless we create our own, youth parties and get ourselves into power. Because the issue of leadership is the single most important lever that's going to drive change in the short run, right? And it actually doesn't take that much time. All you have to do is go to Rwanda to see what I'm talking about. Now, Paul Kagame has many, he's not a perfect leader, right? Let's say that.
Sure.
But there are things that he has done in 20 years. If you're looking at what has happened when they were where they were 20 years ago after the genocide, it's far worse than almost any country in Africa is today, right? Yet the strides that they've made in 20 years in terms of improvements in child mortality and health and statistics and education and all these things, and infrastructure. I mean, the economy is, and they are, if they continue where they're going, in another 20, 30 years, they'll be out of, it'll be a really prime example of what can happen in Africa.
Really,
but it's all about leadership. Here. So unless we take political power, and actually, because we don't have strong institutions in Africa, and so just one or two leaders can actually make or break a country.
I was born in a village in Zimbabwe and I live in Switzerland. We need to think about 2030 from an African young person being a global citizen, and not only from the notion of being Afrocentric as if the world will always be confined, because thought, knowledge, technology, capital is so transacted every day across boundaries. But at times when you talk about young people, when you talk about the future, it's as if we would just be confined here. So I'm looking at Generation 2030 in a way that Africa and its young people is part of harvesting the global, that youth dividend has to be part of a globalized conversation.
To feel a sense of outrage that 50% of all under 5 deaths are in this continent, that 75% of all the people living under $1.25 a day are on this continent, that there are more kids living in fragile situations or out of school on this continent. Are you outraged by that?
Yes.
Well, if you are outraged by that, then do two things, which I used to say to people in Latin America. I used to be an economist, used to work in Latin America. They would always go and say, well, we've got this big debt crisis, it was the fund, the IMF, and their policies, and all the debt is owed to Western banks, and we have bad leaders. And after listening to this for a number of years, I kind of went and said, look, there's two things you've got to do, because I'm a little bit tired of hearing this. One, take responsibility for your own actions. You're in control of your lives. And secondly, look for your own solutions.
The real challenge of changing Africa is at a country level. And the way we change a country is by building power at a local level. So we've got to go back into the villages, into the communities, into the slums, and organize our people. There's innovative solutions that don't even require any government intervention. At the end of the day, when you've done something, you go to government and say, this is what you've got to scale up. What is a politician interested in? In staying in power. I've been there, so I know that. So what is the thing that the politician is scared of? They're scared of demonstrations in the street and someone banging on their door. They're scared to lose the election at the ballot box. They're scared of reputational damage, and you have a powerful tool that no one can control in your hands, and that's Twitter and the Facebook and the social media. They are powerful tools. Use them to effectively. You should be tweeting everything we're debating here across the world. You have the world at your disposal. You need to take this conversation into the rest of Africa. You need to be connecting with millions of young people who feel as frustrated as you are.
Agreed.
And so I think ultimately it's about taking the solutions we know work. It's not rocket science, this.
We hope you enjoyed our coverage of the Generation 2030 Africa Report. Many thanks to UNICEF, and until next week, take care.